We're going to start today with Ukraine, you guys. And I'm sure most of you have been keeping up on kind of the general happenings and details. So what I'm going to try to focus on today is how the media has covered it, and compare that to how they've covered other instances. And I really want to be clear, you guys, this is not meant as whataboutism. This is not meant as a justification for Putin or Russia. What this is meant as is some context that I think is sorely lacking in most of the press. So I'm going to start here by showing you guys a thread that Alan McLeod put together, where journalists essentially admit that they are covering Ukraine with more emphasis and urgency because they're racist. And he has a number of examples here. Really encourage you all to follow at Alan R. McLeod on Twitter. He's consistently pointing these kinds of issues out. Thread, the most racist Ukraine coverage on TV news. The BBC, quote, "It's very emotional for me because I see European people with blue eyes and blonde hair being killed." Ukraine's deputy chief prosecutor, David Sakvarelidze, apologies for butchering that. You guys can see, I mean, that's just how overt can you possibly be in your racism? That is insane. And I also want to note, you guys, these people aren't even just saying this privately. They think it's okay. They think this is acceptable enough that they can just go spout it on TV publicly. That it just goes to show how comfortable they feel in their racism. In addition to the nauseating nature of it to start with. Number two, CBS News, quote, "This isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This is a relatively civilized, relatively European city." That's from CBS foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata. Again, open, overt racism. Open, overt racism. Number three is Al Jazeera, quote, "What's compelling is looking at them, the way they are dressed. These are prosperous, middle-class people. There are not obviously refugees trying to get away from the Middle East or North Africa. They look like any European family that you'd live next door to." Once again, you guys, I mean, what do I even add to that? That's just explicit fucking racism. And that they're comfortable just spewing this on TV shows you what kind of environment the media is in, what kind of sort of tone is considered normal and acceptable in the media. Number four, BMS TV in France. Quote, "We are in the 21st century. We are in a European city, and we have cruise missiles fire, and a cruise missile fire as though we were in Iraq or Afghanistan. Can you imagine?" So notice, you guys, I want to take a moment on this one. Notice the fucking framing. It's totally acceptable and normal for violence to happen in the Middle East to this asshole. He just, the presumption is that violence will be inflicted upon Middle Eastern civilians. But the outrage is when that violence trickles out of the Middle East. Again, just open, explicit racism. And it informs us as to why the media has been so nonstop covering Ukraine when they completely neglect to cover Yemen or Somalia or Sudan or Ethiopia or Iraq or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Libya or Palestine, where we're supporting an ethnic cleansing campaign, right? Because those places are where violence is expected. That's normal and okay, according to this fucking pathetic excuse for a human being. Carrying on here, the Daily Telegraph. "This time war is wrong because the people look like us and have Instagram and Netflix accounts. It's not in a poor, remote country anymore." That's Daniel Hannan. Once again, scum of the earth, overt racism. Just typing that out and spewing it to the public, thinking that that's completely normal and acceptable. It goes to show you what these people's conversations are behind closed doors. If they'll say that in a newspaper, if they'll say this shit live on TV, can you even imagine what they're saying privately or what they really believe? Can you even imagine? Number six, ITV in the UK, quote, "The unthinkable has happened. This is not a developing third world nation. This is Europe." So she at least knew to use the new age dog whistle, which is developing or developed, but it's no less racist. It's no less an admission of caring more about people who are white than you care about people in the Middle East. BMS TV again, this is France. Quote, "It's an important question. We're not talking here about Syrians fleeing. We're talking about Europeans." I mean, how is there not a follow-up to that, you guys? What exactly do you mean? What exactly is the difference to you? How is there not a fucking follow-up to that? What distinction are you making? Why is it okay that this violence happens in Syria? Again, just absolute scum of the earth. And these are the people that we prop up to give us our news. These are the people whose opinions are supposed to fucking matter. I don't even know how to contain myself right now. It's unbelievable. Number 8, if you speak French, sample from the racism buffet on offer. For anyone who does happen to speak French, I do not. Go give that a look on Alan's thread. There's another Spanish one here, and this is translated to English. Quote, these aren't like the other children that we've become accustomed to see suffer on TV. These children are blonde with blue eyes, so this is very important. Okay, there's an open admission, an overt, admission that kids with blonde hair and blue eyes matter more. This, by the way, often from the same crowd that likes to say all lives matter. You're telling on yourself. You're fucking telling on yourself. Again, pathetic excuse for a human being. Number 10, star UK media personality Matthew Wright on ITV's flagship show This Morning. Quote, the US has used a thermobaric bomb before in Afghanistan, but the idea of it being used in Europe is stomach churning. But it's not stomach churning for that to be used against Afghan civilians. That's acceptable. By the way, right now, you guys, 23 million Afghans are facing food insecurity and potential famine because the United States has seized their reserves. Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about that? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about the starving Afghans? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about the millions in Yemen that are being they're being having a genocide inflicted upon them by the Saudi Arabian government and the UAE with the assistance of the United States and many of our NATO allies? Do you see wall-to-wall coverage about that, you guys? Any wall-to-wall coverage about the fact that we were bombing Somalia as Putin invaded Ukraine? No? None. Of course not. Carrying on, 11, this one's the New York Times. On U.S. veterans going to Ukraine, it not so subtly suggests that Middle Easterners love dictatorships. Quote, after years of serving in smoldering operations trying to spread democracy in places that only had a tepid interest in it. Cite that, New York Times. Where did anyone in the Middle East suggest they only had a tepid interest in democracy? Okay, you can oppose like right-wing theocratic jihadist groups without taking their views and projecting them across an entire region. Notice the framing on that. That's the New York Times, the supposed gold standard in fucking journalism. You guys, I worked myself up on this one. Great work from Alan McLeod. Again, I want to encourage everybody to follow him at Alan R. McLeod on Twitter, bringing this stuff to light. This is why the coverage has been so much more urgent, with so much more emphasis on Ukraine than any of the other, violent actions that have been taken, often by the United States and our allies around the planet. And just to really drive that point home, you guys, and show you kind of how distinct this the difference in coverage is. This is also by Alan McLeod in Mint Press News. It's different. They're white. Media ignore conflicts around the world to focus on Ukraine. A Mint Press News analysis found that in a single week, Fox News, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC ran almost 1,300 separate stories on the Ukraine invasion, 2 stories on the Syria attack, 1 on Somalia, and none at all on the Saudi-led war on Yemen. 1,300 stories on the Ukraine, you guys. 1,300, and we get 3 combined. 3 combined on Syria, Somalia, and Yemen. And again, there's a bit of a visual here. I'm going to skip over the text just to show you guys this. Look at this chart. Look at this chart. Blue is Fox News, red is the New York Times, green is the Washington Post, orange is CNN, and yellow is MSNBC. Do you see any coverage on Yemen, Somalia, or Syria there? No. But look at the number of articles that have been written on Ukraine. Okay. Again, you guys, I do want to give the caveat. This is not meant to be whataboutism. This is not meant to justify anything on behalf of Putin or Russia. It's to point out to you, like, how the press manufactures consent for certain things and not others, how the press dictates what you at home care about and what you think matters, based upon what's called propaganda by omission. So they leave out Yemen, the Middle East, Africa. They leave that out, and focus in exclusively on Ukraine, and so that they can start the story at Putin's a bad guy. They also conveniently, as I covered last week, they leave out a lot of the context pertaining specifically to Ukraine. They leave out that we engaged in a coup in 2014, that the CIA helped engage in a coup, right-wing coup, that was obvious and blatant aggression. They leave out the fact that we've been arming neo-Nazis. Again, blatant aggression. They leave out the fact that NATO for the last 20 plus years has expanded east towards Russia in an obvious move of aggression. And I actually meant to cue up a Noam Chomsky clip here from a handful of years ago, where he was saying, the quote he gave was, "It wouldn't matter who the Russian leader is. That's going to be perceived as aggression. Doesn't matter who's in charge. It's not about Putin. When you keep expanding NATO, which was specifically designed, specifically implemented, formed, whatever, to oppose the Soviet Union, and then you keep expanding that group closer and closer to Russia's borders, how are they supposed to take it, you guys? How are they supposed to take it?" And again, same caveat I gave last week. I'm not suggesting that any one individual thing here might have been the linchpin that caused Putin to invade. I'm not suggesting that if we didn't do any one particular thing that he wouldn't have. I'm just providing the full context, because if you actually want to understand history or understand a world event, you have to take that context into consideration. And the media steadfastly refuses to provide it for you, as you guys saw there with that chart, just as one example. I also wanted to bring you guys there's been a lot of talk about a no-fly zone. I gave my opinions on sanctions last week, and largely my opinion is the same on that. Just to briefly kind of reiterate, guys, sanctions are aggression. Okay, they used to be called blockades. Sanctions are a form of an act of war. Okay, and the sanctions that we are currently inflicting upon countries like Cuba and Iran are barbaric and have been internationally condemned, because they hit civilians in such horrible ways and cause human suffering. So the sanctions discussion, what's so bothersome to me about the sanctions discussion is that there's this, in the United States, it's framed as though there's only two options: a hot war or sanctions. There's no, acceptance of any other argument. Like, hey, maybe the first thing you do, you guys, if you're digging a fucking hole, the first thing you got to do is stop digging, right? If you want to fill that hole back in, you got to stop digging. So when the United States continues our aggression towards Russia, we're just digging the hole even further. If we inflict sanctions on Russia, we're digging the hole even further. The first thing you have to do if you want to calm this thing down is stop escalating yourself. Okay? And the other point I want to make, to somebody like Vladimir Putin, who pretty clearly is like a narcissistic, demigod type person, who, right? To someone with that psychology, how do you think those sanctions are going to be received? Do you think Putin will look at the sanctions and go, "Oh, well, now I'll back off. Now that they've gotten more aggressive, now I'll back off"? You're insane if you think that. You're off your fucking rocker if you think that. He'll take it as aggression and he'll respond accordingly. So the sanctions discussion to me is missing a whole lot of context in terms of how it would affect Russian civilians, how it would affect resources and international markets, and how ineffective I think it is likely to be, how I think it will escalate more than anything else. If you'd like to calm tensions, you guys, again, the first thing you do is you stop escalating yourself. If you want to fill the hole in, you stop fucking digging first. The United States is still digging. Okay, so there's this tendency to focus in and start the story at Putin invaded, now what do we do? No, you got to go back and see the full context to understand what it is that you should do. Okay. Anyway, to get back to the no-fly zone, which there has been a lot of discussion about in the Ukraine, I have a piece here in Jacobin that I want to show you guys. This is by Ben Burgess. A no-fly zone in Ukraine would start World War III. It's the worst idea possible. A growing chorus of voices is calling for Joe Biden to establish a no-fly zone, an action that would risk the future of human civilization. I'm not much of an REM fan, but I've had "It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine" stuck in my head for days. A disturbing number of high-profile voices have been calling for President Joe Biden to establish a no-fly zone in Ukraine. To his credit, he steadfastly refused to do so. But these forces are only going to get louder as the Russian invasion drags on. My boiling hot take is that, and hear me out on this, starting World War III would be a bad thing. Biden's State of the Union was interrupted by chants of USA. A member of the U.S. House of Representatives has proposed deporting all Russian students from the United States. A prominent United States senator has publicly urged the assassination of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The political atmosphere in the United States has quickly turned xenophobic, bloodthirsty, and dark. And I just want to point out very quickly, you guys, can you imagine if following our invasion of Iraq, another a sitting senator or sitting member of parliament or something from some other powerful country around the world advocated for assassinating George W. Bush? Imagine, just imagine what the United States response would be. Imagine. What if after we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, same situation, another member of parliament or Congress or something from around the world came forward and said, we're going to deport all Americans? Can you imagine? Can you even imagine the response in the United States to such a thing? So it used to be called the Chomsky Rule in international relations. If you flip the players and your opinion changes, you're not principled. You're just engaging in nationalism. And you know, so I just wanted to point that out, that our Congress members, our senators say things that if they were said about our president would be taken as aggression. We have this sense of entitlement around the entire world, as though America should have some sort of control over other sovereign countries. And of course, when we invade those sovereign countries, that doesn't get any coverage. When we bomb people, it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, they're brown. Okay. Carrying on in Jacobin here. They got a Lindsey Graham tweet. Is there a Brutus in Russia? Is there a more successful Colonel Stauffenberg in the Russian military? The only way this ends is for somebody in Russia to take this guy out. You would be doing your country and the world a great service. Again, I want you to imagine that tweet coming from some, say, high-ranking Chinese official or something when we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, saying, you know, is there someone in the U.S. military that will assassinate George W. Bush? Because we got to take this guy out. Can you even fucking imagine? Can you imagine? While the United States has provided a great deal of military aid to Ukraine, direct action by the American government has so far been mostly restricted to economic sanctions. It's worth noting that not all sanctions are the same. Putin's government is waging a monstrous imperial war. While we should oppose any sanctions that add to the misery of working-class Russians, targeted sanctions against individual Russian oligarchs are a different issue, just as it would have been hard to object if other powers had responded to the invasion of Iraq with targeted sanctions on politically connected American billionaires. You guys, I want to dispel with the notion, I disagree with Ben in one respect here. I don't think it's as easy to control who gets hit by the sanctions as Ben seems to frame it. Because you can almost always, these oligarchs can almost always implement domestic policy that basically allows them to dodge the harm from the sanctions and pass it down to the poor and working class in their country. Okay, we've also already seen, supposedly, the sanctions that we've engaged in were targeting the oligarchs. We've already seen issues with credit cards and ATMs and stuff in Russia, all sorts of issues, actually. So these are hitting Russian civilians even when we attempted to target them to the oligarchs. I just wanted to dispel with the notion that sanctions can be targeted in such a way to only hit a cadre of oligarchs. That's just a misframing of how sanctions actually operate in most instances. Carrying on. But there's a pervasive atmosphere of jingoistic fervor, a sense of urgency that the United States do something. On the level of civil society, this has expressed itself throughout absurdities like the International Cat Federation banning Russian-bred cats from competition, and petty or not so petty cruelties ranging from calls in the mixed martial arts world to ban Russian fighters to the oncology network pulling out of Russia. I guess if you can't punish Vladimir Putin, you can at least punish cancer patients who live in his country. Most disturbing, though, has been the parade of calls for American military intervention. In most cases, this takes the form of calls for the United States to set up a no-fly zone in Ukraine. A sitting U.S. congressman has made that call, so has a senator. Dan Hodges of the Mail on Sunday, the biggest selling Sunday paper in the UK, has said that not establishing a no-fly zone would be an act of appeasement. No different to our appeasement, oh, Jesus Christ, of Hitler in 1938. Give me a break. If anyone wants to compare this to Munich, you're out of your damn mind. You're out of your damn mind. So he carried on there. I encourage you all to read the rest of that article if you are so inclined. The point here is, you guys, a no-fly zone is meaningless unless you're going to shoot down Russian planes. That's an act of war. So unless you're going to go forward with starting World War III, then you really can't actually enact a no-fly zone. You certainly can't enforce it unless you want to start World War III. So what this is a way for these warmongering, senators and leaders and the military-industrial complex and all that, and the press that wants to manufacture consent for this war. It's a way for them to say we want to start World War III without actually saying we want to start World War III. And then, of course, if they implement a no-fly zone and then we end up shooting down a Russian jet, what they'll do is they'll fucking call that escalation on Russia's behalf. So our aggression will be framed as a defensive action, and then we'll use that as an excuse to fully engage with Russia. So again, you guys, keep full context in mind here, and don't allow the short little sound bits like no-fly zone. Don't allow yourself to be convinced by that, or don't allow yourself to misunderstand what that actually means. That means we should start World War III. That's what these people are fucking saying. With a nuclear power, we should start World War III. I've seen articles like, one of them was like, maybe a small nuclear war would actually be good. I mean, it's you guys, we're at this, like, the press is a parody of themselves at this point. What they're doing is clearly just taking papers written by fucking Raytheon and fucking Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Northrop Grumman and just plastering it out to the public, publishing it on their paper as though it's some form of news or commentary of any sort. So I'm sorry I got a little bit worked up there, you guys, but this is just, I think if you're not worked up over this, there's something wrong. That is overt, brazen racism being admitted by the press, who we are supposed to trust. And I also want to point out on a second note, Lee Camp loses his fucking show, right? We can't platform Lee Camp, but we have no problem platforming overt racist. Overt racist. It's the way that we pick and choose when to care about racism is incredible. It's absolutely incredible. When it's Donald Trump or someone who supports Donald Trump, then we can condemn it. But when it's some reporter at a reputable news organization like the BBC or PBS or what have you, then it's totally fucking fine to engage in overt, blatant racism in order to justify a war with Russia. How is that acceptable, but Lee Camp's show has to be canceled? It's absurd, you guys. And I recognize that was like part of a sanction. It's a little bit more complicated. But you guys get my point, right? We got to cancel any independent sources that are going to tell you the truth about this shit. But we can allow that racism to happen on BBC and PBS. That's fine. That's just fine. Why would we care about Yemen or Palestine, right? It's disgusting. It is disgusting. If it does not make your stomach churn, there is something seriously wrong with you and you should seek help. Okay? So that is what I wanted to talk about with Ukraine today, you guys, and we'll obviously keep up on that story, but I just wanted to put into perspective how the propaganda by omission has worked here. We are far and away, the worst perpetrators of violations of international law. It's not even close, but we have the gall here to say, well, Russia's not following international law. Again, our actions don't justify Putin's actions, you guys. I don't want to be misunderstood here. That is not a point. It's not like, well, we're bad, so he can be bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a story in and of itself, how the press has covered this, and you should be made aware of the overt racism that drives coverage and determines what matters to these people and what does not. And it's pretty clear that white people matter to these people and brown people and black people do not matter to these people. Let's just call it what it is, okay? Anyway, again, I apologize. I got a little bit worked up about that, you guys.